We begin Queer News tonight with breaking news. Wilton Manors considers the last Stonewall Pride over rising costs of police protection. Wilton Manors City Commissioner Chris Caputo issued a stark warning to the South Florida LGBTQ+ community today for the risk of losing mega events like this month's Stonewall Pride Parade and Festival and Halloween's Wicked Manors, all because it has become too expensive to provide police protection. With little notice, and at the start of America's recognition of June's Pride Month, the organizers of Stonewall Pride were shocked with the police services and equipment bill presented just this week. Caputo says, quote, "The first Stonewall was a riot. The police costs for this year's event are enough to cause one too. The combined bill for police services and equipment has risen from about $50,000 last year to a shocking $92,000 this year." While WMEG, the nonprofit behind Stonewall Pride, was told to expect increased costs this year, neither they nor I expected to learn the bill increased by over 80% this past week, end quote. In an exclusive interview today with Queer News Tonight anchor Al Ferguson, Commissioner Caputo discussed the late notice for the police and security costs. He said, quote, "It's an epic failure on the city's part. It's unacceptable to receive this news just 3 weeks in advance. It's extortion," end quote. It should be noted that the city of Wilton Manors does not benefit from any of those fees as they go to the actual payroll and security costs. Jeff Sterling, the president for Stonewall Pride, echoed the dramatic news for the organization. He said, quote, "Stonewall Pride cannot afford nor is willing to go from around $40,000 to $90,000 for police officers. This is in addition to a large contingent of nearly 200 private security, medical carts, ambulance, physical safety structures, and fire watch, which adds an additional $100,000 of the costs to execute the festival. Compared to events like Miami Beach Pride, our costs exceed theirs, and they are a 2-day event. Our police costs are double what our sister event, Fort Lauderdale Pride, pays for 2 days," end quote. The growing problem for Wilton Manors and other communities may be in the decision-making disconnects that occur between city elected officials, city management, and divisions like the police department and their nonprofit event organizations. For Wilton Manors, the city manager, Leanne Henderson, reports to elected city commissioners, including Caputo. But departments like its police and police chief report to Henderson. As a result, there is no published police and cost plan for an event like Stonewall Pride. Caputo explains, quote, "There is no spreadsheet for a special events protection plan. I have asked for it. A spreadsheet to get the numbers they quote. It's so subjective," end quote. Caputo suggests this leads to the situation that Stonewall Pride faces at the last minute. Quote, "Everyone worries about their own jobs. Absent the city commission doing something, there is no clear plan. We need to pass an ordinance on how event decisions are made. The city commission is accountable. We should have fixed this," end quote. Commissioner Caputo is disappointed with how the news is delivered because the unexpected bill is also asked to be paid full and upfront. Caputo says, quote, "You are asking a nonprofit organization to pay upfront before a single gate fee is contributed? There is no way an organization can do that," end quote. The loss of an event like Wilton Manors Stonewall Pride could have significant effects on revenue for the city. A 2017 economic study by independent consultants determined the economic impact of Stonewall Pride was $4,157,000. Caputo suggests the economic impact is far greater. Adjusted for inflation and the growth of the event, an argument can easily be made that the economic impact is well over $6 million today, end quote. The continued growth of police and other expenses may spell an end to public service events like Stonewall Pride, unless realistic solutions are found. Caputo concludes, quote, "Frankly, there are very few options that will keep Stonewall Pride viable in the city of Wilton Manors for years to come. One option, which will almost certainly need to happen, is raising the entry donation from $5 to $10. A second option is for WMEG to file a lawsuit arguing that police charges are a violation of their First Amendment rights. Stonewall Pride, much like the original Stonewall Riot, is a free speech gathering designated to protest bills like anti-gay legislation called Don't Say Gay, A third solution may be a political one, end quote. Caputo suggests in the interview with Queer News Tonight that there can be hope on the horizon. He says, quote, "I am optimistic there can be a solution. We must create a model for events like this and it be set in documents accessible to all. Then other events in our city and even other prides everywhere can see a model that works here in Wilton Manor, and it can work everywhere." Jeff Sterling, the president of nonprofit 501c3 Stonewall Pride, encourages everyone to attend this important Stonewall Pride Parade and Festival on June 18th. He says, quote, "We are going to do our best to provide a world-class Pride experience that will make our entire community proud," end quote. Happening Out Television Network and Queer News Tonight will be broadcasting the parade live on Roku and Apple Television. We will also be reporting on what happens next for our major LGBTQ+ events in the city of Wilton Manors. You can read Chris Caputo's complete online editorial online and on Stands Now in SFGN. For Queer News Tonight, I'm John Hayden.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Queer News Tonight, the world's first and only LGBTQ+ daily evening news show. Recently, conservative politicians have been attacking LGBTQ+ youth. That's why tonight's episode brings you the top headlines of today with the opinions of this panel of diverse students. It's time to queer up the news. It is 8 p.m. Thursday, June 2nd, 2022, and we are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. So many of your important stories we are going to tell this evening on Queer News Tonight.
This is the world's first live daily LGBTQ evening news show, literally out of the closet and into the headlines on Queer News Tonight with Al Ferguson.
Thank you for joining Queer News Tonight. This is the world's first and only unedited live LGBTQ+ evening news show. Whatever happens, you will see it. Queer News Tonight is supported by viewers like you. We are part of the partnership between Happening Out Television Network and Hotspots magazine. Hotspots is celebrating 36 years of the LGBTQ+ experience. We bring you the best of LGBTQ+ news, entertainment, and support of our community.
I'm your anchor at Queer News Tonight, Evyn Almanzar. Let's welcome anchor Christian C.J. Walden. He is the vice president of Prism FL Inc.'s board of directors, former president of Boca High's Gender Sexuality Alliance, and an avid journalist who is now an intern with South Florida Gay News. Their motto is, quote, "I cannot sit idly by while people of color and the LGBTQ+ community face exacerbated discrimination," end quote. Good evening, CJ.
Thank you. Let's welcome anchor Javier Gomez, a high school senior here in Florida, heavily involved in advocacy and political activism since the age of 13 years old, often being outspoken about injustices in our democracy, including LGBTQ+ discrimination. Alongside social activism, he is also an aspiring fashion designer and uses queer and political expression as inspiration. His pieces are often inspired by gender fluidity, whimsicality, and social work. Welcome, Javier.
Thank you, CJ. Let's welcome Jack Fitzgerald. Jack is a proud student activist for queer rights and the environment. He loves politics, debate, reading, hiking, and his pets. He currently attends JP Taravella High School, but hopes he can get his degree in wildlife biology and for a future in politics. Good evening, Jack.
Thank you. We are the reporters for Queer News Tonight, and this evening we begin with the queer headlines from the LGBTQ+ community in South Florida and across America. Our community is diverse and around the world and vast, and here are the bullet points for queer news for today, Thursday, June 2nd.
All right, let's start by queering up politics. The Great Replacement? MTG thinks it's the gay replacement. LGBTQ+ individuals and minorities in general frequently have to face losing their culture and identity when faced with an unfriendly majority population. Ironically, that fear is now being used by the ultra-conservative to turn the cisgender white community against others. It has become very popular since French author Renaud Camus wrote about the Great Replacement as a fear that Muslims and other immigrants would replace the white majority in France. That theory is now being used here in the US and has become a talking point on networks like Fox News and OANN. U.S. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene is taking it another step and stating that the LGBTQ+ community will make the straight community extinct within 4 or 5 generations. Watch this.
They just want you to think that all of a sudden the entire population is steadily turning gay or turning trans, just generation. Probably in about 4 or 5 generations, no one will be straight anymore. Everyone will be either gay or trans or non-conforming or whatever the list of 50 or 60 different options there are.
Well, we're turning gay, not just born.
I think it's interesting that she said 50 or 60 options as if it's a choice. Being gay is not a choice and something everyone needs to know.
Yeah, I don't really understand at all when people are like, oh, it's like a choice, you can choose to stop being that. Why would someone deliberately choose to put themselves in that position where they can be attacked by other people? Like,
with what we're going to go through on another story later, exactly.
Yeah. Additionally, like, I think there's a proven track record of conversion therapy and similar practices not working. You would think that myth would be expelled by now.
Right, no, conversion therapy is a very long history that would be best if it wasn't still being used in certain states. But I think it's important to remember that while they think it's turning people gay and there are more people coming out, it's not because there are more people turning gay. It's because there are more people feeling comfortable in the space that they're in to come out. It's all about safety.
I say good. That's all I say.
They're getting...
But I do think that, you know, what she's trying to say is that they're turning into the minority from a majority perspective. So it's really funny because we've been the minority for so long, and then now they're afraid to turn into that minority, but that they're the ones that have been using greed, power, you name it, on us for decades. So, I mean, how the tables turn. That's all I got to say.
But why are they scared of becoming the minority? Do you get discriminated for being a minority?
Who knows?
That is very good point. But CJ, you want to tell us the next story?
Of course. Let's queer up business. The Other Eden NFT collection will support the UK's LGBTQ+ community. Non-fungible tokens, or NFTs, have taken the internet by storm. These digital items work similar to cryptocurrencies, but instead of there being many of them, like Bitcoin, they are unique. They are tied to the code that is used to create those cryptocurrencies and most commonly are connected to Ethereum. A new collection called The Other Eden will be going on sale June 9th, and funds will go to projects and initiatives that support the LGBTQ+ community. The collection will feature major artists in the LGBTQ+ community and its allies, such as Monroe Bergdorf, The Plastic Boy, Woody Cook, DJ Fat Tony, and others. The pieces will be created by photographer Luke Nungent and will be exhibited at the London Gallery.
Queer Up Courts. Former college football player tries, quote, gay panic, end quote, defends after killing online date. Exactly 1 year after the beating death of an LGBTQ+ individual, a jury acquitted former Virginia Tech football player Ismi Men Itut. According to reports, the victims, 40-year-old Jerry Paul Smith created a Tinder profile claiming to be a female emergency room physician. After they met for a sexual encounter where the victim posed as Angie Renee, Etut returned a few weeks later to confirm their gender. Upon finding that the victim was biologically male, Etut beat him to death. Etut pleaded not guilty during the, quote, gay panic, end quote, defense, which is used when perpetrators claims to have lost control after learning of someone's gender identity or sexual orientation. Virginia has recently passed a ban on the defense, but it does not take place or effect until July 1st.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about this sort of gay panic defense, and it still can be used in certain states and countries. And the idea behind it, I truly don't understand, because why is finding out someone's gender identity or sexual orientation jarring enough for you to go and physically harm them and even kill them? That's just, it's a weak excuse for just something so vile.
I never see people being as scared, which is why I'm very confused at the term homophobia, because they just want to discriminate and they want to hate against us. They're not scared of us because they've always had the advantage of, well, turning against us and making us the minority and having us being discriminated.
And additionally, like, this guy came back weeks later. Like, this wasn't in the moment or anything, where it still is not a relevant excuse, but obviously. But he came back weeks later. I don't see how that's not seen as a targeted attack.
Right, because it wasn't an immediate panic response. And even then, panic?
Yeah. Or even how is it not seen as a hate crime?
Right, and it's absurd to think that there's a justifiable type of reasoning to think that someone can actually harm, murder, or even cause serious permanent mental or physical harm to someone just because they're not straight, or they're not conforming to an identity or a sexual orientation. So it's to think that that's still in place. It's pretty alarming.
Yeah.
It's archaic. It sounds like something you'd read in a history book rather than a newsline.
Right.
Mm.
It's really regressive.
Yeah, no, it's also important to remember that queer people have higher chances of suicide and mental illness. And so going out in some states for queer people is a daily fear if they are out. And so I think the knowledge of certain people living in those places where they can be murdered and it be justified, that just adds to an already at-risk group of people.
Or even in Florida, when LGBTQ plus youth are indirectly being condemned to death, statistics show that when you don't give youth the support they need,
they are at higher risk for suicide.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Don't Say Gay bill here, what's going to happen?
Yeah, no, we'll hear more about that, Jack.
Well, in a bit more positive news, or at least hopeful, a new study shows that kids understand their gender identity much earlier than previously thought. A new study released by the American Academy of Pediatrics indicates that not only are children able to understand their own gender at a younger age, but also that transgender children who are allowed to socially transition will very rarely revert their identity as they get older. The study found that an average of 5 years after their initial social transition, 7.3% of youth had retransitioned at least once. At the end of this period, most youth identified as binary transgender youth, 94%, including the 1.3% who retransitioned to another identity before returning to their binary transgender identity. 2.5% of the youth identified as cisgender, and 3.5% as non-binary. Later, cisgender identities were more common amongst youth whose initial social transition occurred before the age of 6 years, and the retransition often occurred before the age of 10 years. Retransitioning is frequently used as a political weapon by conservatives to fight against gender-affirming care in youth, and this study pretty solidly shows that allowing social transition at an early age reduces the chances of this happening.
Yeah, so anyone have any thoughts about this before?
I think it's really important that we have this more solid evidence to combat the wild things so many conservative pundits will speak about, because it's solid evidence against a very frequently used talking point.
Yeah, no, and I absolutely agree that younger kids are way smarter than we give them credit, because there will be kids who look at me and they're like, "Are you a boy or a girl?" And I'm just like, "I was born in the wrong body, so I'm a boy. I was born in a girl's body." And they're like, "Okay." So it's really not that difficult to understand when you explain this to these kids and they get it like this versus the hesitance that you receive from older people because they're not their brains are they confine themselves to this one way of thinking versus kids, they have this open way of thinking. And I think it's also important to note that less than 1% of individuals who transition detransition. So that's between 1 and 2.4% of trans people who end up detransitioning, meaning that 97% of people who transition are happy with their gender identity and their transition. I am one of those people. I will not be detransitioning. So the whole reason that they use detransitioners as a weapon is because it's so rare that when it does happen, it blows up in the media.
Right.
So they think it's so many more people, when in reality, it's just this small group of individuals who blew up because it's out of the ordinary.
Right.
They use that as a commodity for their bigotry, for their hatred.
Yeah, and it's also great that this article is realizing that gender is a spectrum, and your journey to figuring that out is nonlinear. It's going to take time. There are going to be moments where you think you're one thing and you end up being another. Before I came out as a trans male, I thought I was non-binary, and it was just like, well, that's not right. So, you know, it's nothing is ever a straight answer, ironically, you know?
Yeah, everything's a journey.
I do agree with piggybacking off what you were saying about, I think we underestimate children and their kind of capabilities of understanding stuff, especially obviously kind of rifting off to the Don't Say Gay bill. There's been a lot of debate of whether what we should teach kids at school or instruct kids. And a lot of these things, a lot of kids find out who they are at a very young age. It doesn't take lessons, or it doesn't take someone to inculcate that you are something, when in reality they already know who they are. So that's something that's really, I'm really happy this article was published in a way that it kind of reinforces the idea of what we are all thinking, but it solidifies it with scientific evidence.
Absolutely. That's really important.
I'd love to see even more study into how those rates and how those percentages are affected when you include physical transition and like certain aspects of that, the stages of that, and how much I'd love to just how that affects the whole percentages, what rates detransition, retransition.
Right, because it's also important to remember that socially transitioning is only one aspect of it. There's the medical transitioning as well. And in order to medically transition, it's a requirement that you have socially transitioned. So prior to getting on testosterone, I need a letter saying that this is who I was and this is who I have been living as. So it's not just a bunch of kids like just figuring out this thing from the internet or anything, and now they're jumping on hormones. No, you know, nothing is ever. The road to getting on hormones and medically transitioning is not as simple as some parties like to make it seem. And I think that's also something that we should acknowledge.
It's an arduous journey, especially when you're faced with transphobia and homophobia.
It's long and very tedious, but I will say it's incredibly rewarding.
Oh, of course. You get to be who you are.
Yeah. All right, now it's time to queer up gay culture. Bratz doll line celebrates pride with lesbian couple. The high-fashion teen doll line, Bratz, is celebrating pride with a brand new 2-pack featuring queer icons Nevra and Roxy in new outfits from fashion designer Jimmy Paul. Nevra was first introduced to the Bratz movies and doll lines in 2003 and Roxy in 2004. Parent company MGA Entertainment revealed via the official Bratz Twitter that the two had become a couple back in 2020. This Pride celebration isn't just for publicity, as the MGA Cares charity department has committed to donating $25,000 to the Trevor Project. Bratz creative director Jasmine Larian said, quote, "For more than 20 years, the Bratz brand has remained true to its values of inclusivity and authenticity, and the Bratz Pride x Jimmy Paul collaboration speaks volumes to this commitment," unquote.
as a big fashion lover and obviously someone who wants to study fashion, I do love that there was a collaboration with Bratz, as Bratz we've known has been a kind of this center, kind of this focal point for a lot of people who have kind of found their identity via these dolls. I know that I did when I, like, for me, I love to dress feminine. Doesn't mean that I want to be a girl, but it just means that I like embracing my femininity. And I think that's what Bratz loves. I think that's what Bratz has done a lot with and loves to portray, which I definitely think it's great. And then kind of aligning that with fashion, because fashion is kind of one of the biggest steps to finding your own identity and understanding who you are, because you know, you can express who you are in one way, but if you present yourself in another way, that's how you kind of express yourself in your identity. So I'm 100% support it, and I might be buying it myself. So you know, I do love the concept, and I do love that brands are also focusing more on not just the rainbow capitalism of it all, but more of the donating and also sending a powerful message to the future generation, and also the generation that, you know, the older generation. So
yeah, no, it's I've noticed I didn't really have Bratz dolls growing up because I don't know, wasn't my thing. Wonder why. No, but I have noticed over the years that they have been really inclusive when it comes to race and just your expression. And just like, let's go lesbians, let's go.
Yes.
Sorry, had to. But I think it's really great because the youth deserves to see themselves in media, and now they're seeing these dolls, these really mainstream popular dolls. They get to see themselves in that, and I think that's amazing because it's showing kids and even adults that they deserve to be seen and that they should be seen because there's nothing to be ashamed of.
Right, because when you're all alone and you're trying to go through this tough journey or of sexuality or your gender identity, it's important to realize that you're not alone. There's hundreds and thousands of people that go through a similar journey to you.
Yeah.
And I mean, years ago with the earring magic Ken doll, with that whole controversy, it's really nice to see that there is now real representation for the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
While I was more of a Barbie boy myself,
Yes!
I definitely
Gay.
think this marks a really good point in the journey of brands and representation in media and in toys and products, because there's always been queer-coded characters in things like the Ken doll.
Yeah.
We all knew Ken was pretty.
But I think this is probably the first time you've seen in like a children's main media and children's toy a move towards acceptance that's clear. It's not hidden. It's not queer baiting.
Right.
It is out front. It's
Explicitly clear.
proud.
Yeah, and it's with what you said, it's not rainbow capitalism. They're donating to help make a difference for the whole community, not just to make a profit, like many companies are going to be doing this month.
No, that's something that I absolutely love because the Trevor Project does amazing work, and the fact that they're donating money to that organization from their own organization is just, that's something that's I as a queer person, I appreciate, you know, because it's like, yeah, that's really great.
All right. Next, we report on our partnership with the Sunshine Cathedral, the world's largest queer church here in Fort Lauderdale. We are broadcasting from our permanent set here at Sunshine in supporting that partnership. Happening Out Television Network broadcasts the largest LGBTQ plus religious live broadcast in the world, as more than 30,000 watch every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Watch this.
Capo Jr., and I'm a history professor at Florida International University, and Sunshine Cathedral is my queer church.
Let's queer up the road to Stonewall. The history of Stonewall you didn't know. The history of the Stonewall Riots, like much of the history of the LGBTQ+ rights movement, is full of false information, drama, embellished stories, myths, and larger-than-life characters. They were far from the first riot in the history of LGBTQ+ rights, and yet they became a catalyst for change. Here are some of the facts that you may not know about the Stonewall Riots.
Many people don't realize it, but the Stonewall Inn was kind of a dump. It was owned and operated by the Genovese mafia family. The drinks were expensive and watered down. The bar itself was grimy and run down. There were nicer gay bars in New York at the time, but the Stonewall Inn was a relatively safe refuge for the fringe members of the LGBTQ+ community, such as transgender individuals and the leather community.
The Stonewall Riots weren't the birthplace of the fights for gay rights, even in New York. Until 1966, it was illegal to serve gay patrons alcohol. It was a gay rights group called the Mattachine Society who staged a sip-in at a bar called Julius's that helped change that law.
The night of the Stonewall Riots weren't the first police raid. They were very common through the 60s, as public displays of affection between same-sex couples were still illegal. Bars like Stonewall would pay off the police departments, but raids still happened when cops wanted more money or if the politicians wanted some good press. It was one of these common raids that started the events of June 28, 1969.
Many claim that the death of Judy Garland sparked the riots. Interviews with people who were at the event show that this was not the truth. It was mounting frustrations with poor treatment and another raid just a few days earlier that finally sparked the confrontation.
Many credit Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera for starting the riot, but they both claimed that they weren't even near the Stonewall Inn until things were well underway. Some credit Stormy Delaverine, and while she was given mixed answers, there was likely no one individual who started the fights. Also, there was no bricks thrown, as is sometimes claimed.
The riots also weren't just one night. The activism and conflicts continued for almost a week, and during that time, such influential groups as Gay Liberation Front and Gay Activist Alliance were formed.
1 year later, the Christopher Street Gay Liberation Day March took place. This became the first gay pride. Many people are unaware of the facts of what happened at the Stonewall Inn, but the riots are important for how they continue to inspire. Much like the LGBTQ+ community, our movement is as much inspired by the over-the-top myths and characters as it is by any factual account of the event. The most important part of the Stonewall Riots are the legacy of inspiring the fight for equality.
I think it's really important to know the actual history, because you can praise the embellishments, you can think it's all amazing, but if you do not know the facts of what actually happened, you don't realize how much injustice was caused.
Right. LGBTQ+ education is so crucial, and sorry to shamelessly plug, but that is why the work that I do with PRISM to expand access to inclusive LGBTQ+ education is so important, because it's riddled and there's so many sources that say different things. So what are the reader going to believe at the end of the day?
Yeah, what's true?
Not to have a hot take here, and while I think that queer education is very important, especially in schools, and we need that more integrated, I think the story aspect, dramatizing it, having this event that you can put as this story for people to hear and tell, can spread the message just so much more effectively. When people in social situations get caught up with facts and stuff, it can cause arguments or lag the story.
And people get bored, so they don't pay attention.
But when you can have this cohesive, inspiring fight that causes people to get angry and want to have justice, I think it can have more impact and more just ability to spread when you have that more dramatized story.
No, I agree in that sense. It's very important to have stories. I mean, like we mentioned earlier, it's important to have that representation and to have inspiring stories. Full-heartedly agree.
I do agree. I never really thought of it in that aspect, but I do understand that, dramatizing a story and really making a story kind of cohesive, allows for this, I want to say, teaching of the story to be more valid, not more valid, but more approachable in a way. It allows for obviously cohesiveness, but it kind of sets this. I lost my train of thought. I always do this, but what I'm trying to get at is that it's really remarkable to have such a cohesive story because it allows for the approachativeness for it, but it also kind of empowers and allows for other people to want to investigate more and want to bring up the facts because the facts are one thing, but trying to make a story entertaining to people that are younger, who have a less attention span than some adults and whatnot, can be really hard. So making that story really outlandish, but also true to the facts is, can be a gift.
It's like what's going to engage a room of new people, new allies, possibly new members of the community.
Exactly.
Saying, oh yeah, well, some people, we don't really know who started it, really. They were out there. It was probably some fight, scuffle. Rather than saying Marsha P. Johnson walked up and chucked a brick into a crowd of police officers pulling people out of the gay bar. Like, what is going to get a room engaged and excited?
Exactly.
I think it's important that we do both, that we have these important, emotional, inspirational stories, but that we also teach the history because it is our queer history and it's who we are. And guess what? Kids are gay. Kids are finding out who they are more and more every single day. So they deserve to learn their own history.
Right. And while we're in the month of June, I think it's important to remember that we have to thank the people that came before us because now we have the opportunity to have pride celebrations that aren't riots. And while the underlying message is we want justice, we want equality, we want our rights, it's also a celebration. So it's so important to remember that it started as a riot and now we are lucky enough and blessed enough to have the opportunity to be who we are openly without having to explicitly fight.
Of course.
While also being a reminder that we're ready to riot again if we need to.
Exactly. We will band together just like before.
The past generation paved the way for us and we will pave the way for the next generation.
Exactly.
Even if Representative Green doesn't like that.
And like you were saying, we're paving the way for the future generation, but we're also paving the way for their presence in our history books. I mean, with the banning of the books and all that stuff, we don't know how harsh anti-LGBTQ plus legislation can get in the state of Florida, but also nationwide. It allows us to really fight for their presence in our history books so people know the origins of gay liberation, but also understand that these ancestors fought for our place to stay here and what we need to do as the current generation to help out future generations from not facing the same harsh discrimination or ambiguity that we faced.
And I think that's where it matters most, to link it back to the true history rather than the story.
Right.
We've certainly come a long way, but I feel like there are still more steps that need to be taken, like passing the Equality Act and overturning these brash laws that are being made here in Florida and Texas and so many other places in the country.
Yeah, Bobby?
That is today's news for the LGBTQ plus community on the world's first and only daily LGBTQ plus evenings news show. Is our community important to you?
Then help us by liking and subscribing. Ring the bell for updates. Share this news with your friends and family.
Post this broadcast in the many groups you are a member of. Tonight's stories are about our community and deserve the attention of your family and friends. Queer News Tonight is the only live LGBTQ plus digital television show in the world, and that is out of the closet and into your headlines. We need your support.
If our community is to grow, we must tell our stories and bring them to the attention of the broader world. This is the only place in the world that tells these LGBTQ plus stories in motion and in sound. That is the passion of Happening Out Television Network and Queer News Tonight. I'm your anchor, Evyn Almanzar, and you'll see me every Thursday of June. And on behalf of these lovely LGBTQ plus reporters, the anchors of Queer News Tonight, including Javier Gomez, CJ Walden, and Jack Fitzgerald, we will see you daily at 8 p.m. Good night.
LGBTQ plus news is vital for our community and for the broader world as a whole. We have enough enemies at Fox News. Tucker, Sean, and Laura are loud. We need passionate allies. Happening Out Television Network, Queer News Tonight, and It's Happening Out are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. Our community needs your support. Like this broadcast and subscribe now to ensure the